John Bush with the Center for Natural Living.
Hey, how's everybody doing today?
Good.
Yeah, give it up for PorcFest! PorcFest X! Well, when I started off as an activist back in 2002, I never really thought that I'd find myself giving talks on parenting of all subjects, but here I am, and in recent years, I've come to realize that one of the most important things we can do is procreate and raise our children in a manner that's consistent with the philosophy of liberty, which is peace, non-aggression, mutual respect, communication, curiosity, not relying on central institutions, no arbitrary authority as well. And it's my belief that the current generation and existing generations, a large part of them, I don't have much hope for reforming the way that they think. And if we are to create a free society, I think it's going to come in raising a whole new generation of people to challenge the idea that we ought to even organize society with arbitrary coercion and hierarchy, and that we should teach children to reject the idea that it's okay to use force in order to encourage people to change their behavior. And of course, we believe that's wrong for government to use force in order to encourage people to change their behavior. So I think that principle should be applied to parenting as well. And if we can live in a more consistent manner, I do think we'll have a better shot at creating the ideal world that we all are yearning for. And then for those of you that do have children, obviously, I've thought deep and hard about how difficult it is to contemplate bringing a child into this world and having a child grow up through the same hardships and trouble that we've grown up. If anybody's been a victim of the police state or just the idea that people are locked in cages is hard for me. We took a 3-day, 2-night train ride up here. Thankfully, we had a sleeper cabin, but it was still pretty rough with our 20-month-old baby, Aliana, and our new 2-month-old, William Lysander. And it was difficult, and the reason why we took the train is because we don't want our children to think it's normal for there to be checkpoints and for people to get patted down and to go into radiation scanners. We want to raise our children to object to that idea, so it would send a really bad mixed message for us to go and subject ourselves to that in front of them. So as a result, we took the train, and I'm often worried about my children having to experience the same hardship that we are, so I think it's absolutely important that we don't only get active within our communities, but we also get active within our family, and we change the way that we interact with our children and with our significant others. So there's essentially a few themes that I want to touch on, and I'm going to try to do a free-flow conversation here. Got a few notes, and then I'd like to open it up for questions and discussion and have kind of a discourse here. But some of the points that I want to make are mainly that children are the reflection of their parents and their environment and their surrounding. So it's kind of difficult, especially for younger children, to place blame on them in any way, or even in many instances to place a value judgment of good or bad on their behavior. Because as they're growing up, sure, they do have free will, but they're a product of their environment, they're a product of the attitudes of their parents and the lessons that their parents teach and the way that they live their life. So I think if we want to change the behavior of our children, I actually don't even like using that language. If we want our children to live a more virtuous, happy, productive, fulfilled lifestyle, then we ought to look in the mirror if we believe our children are misbehaving or getting into trouble or doing something that they ought not to be doing, since they are the product of us and they are the product of their environment. If we want them to act in a different way, then we should start by taking a deep, hard look in the mirror and see if there's anything that we're doing in our lives to contribute to the way that they act or they behave. I also want to make the point that we ought to use curiosity and communication rather than coercion and condemnation when dealing with our children. And I'll explain some personal stories that illustrate why that's important to me. And then finally, I want to make the point that having children presents a wonderful opportunity for us to better ourselves, not only to try to better our world and have a great, loving, fulfilled, peaceful family, but also to better ourselves as human beings. And I'd like to discuss some examples of how I've learned to change my life as a result of having two wonderful children. I guess we can just start by, I'll start with a personal story that I think illustrates a whole lot. Kids are sponges. It's really funny to see how they mimic their parents' behavior. And again, it presents a wonderful opportunity for us to reflect upon the people that we are and consider changing our behavior. Early on with Aliana, probably when she was 12 months or so, I started noticing that she would mock me when I would have a stressed out sigh. So, something would happen, or I'd realize I got to do something else, or something would fall over, now there's more work, and I would go, dang it. I got it from my father, and he still does it to this day, and my nephew actually does it as well. And when the first time I heard Aliana do it, it really touched me, and I realized, wow, she's carrying on this negative trait that I picked up from my father, and I believe it's a negative trait because there's no use in stressing over senseless things and verbalizing it, because you put that energy out into the world, and your family and your children and those who surround you can certainly pick up on it. And my daughter did pick up on it. So I made the choice to do some positive reflection and think about why it is that I act that way. And I decided to cut that out of my routine. It was difficult because it's not like a voluntary thing that I choose to do. It was more like something that was kind of instinctual. And again, that was ingrained into me and programmed into me. So I stopped doing it, and sure enough, so did my daughter. Another thing is, this is something I'm currently working on right now, is whenever I'd be stressed out at a little bit higher level than the grunt, I'd say, God damn it. God damn it. If I drop something hits my leg, like if it's nighttime and I kick the coffee table, I'd yell out, God damn it. And again, that's what my father does. And that was ingrained in me and programmed into me. And when I saw my daughter start saying, God damn it, I thought, what a perfect opportunity to stop saying that, because as you can see, it's generational. It continues the cycle. So I'm going to make the choice to maybe slow down a little bit in my life and not be so stressed out all the time, not be so busy, so I'm not inclined to have a reaction whenever something happens that shouldn't cause that reaction. And in turn, I hope that my daughter will stop saying GD as well, because Lord knows if Grandma hears it, she probably won't appreciate that too much. Another thing, my lovely fiance, love her to death, but sometimes she gets a little stressed out too and gets a little intense, especially whenever we're bickering amongst ourselves. And again, our children are a direct reflection of us and the relationships that we have. And so sometimes Kat would get a little intense and kind of go off on little rants about something, whether it's about me or about something that she's upset about in her life. And when she does that, Aliana would start doing rants. A lot of it was, kind of a gibberish rant, but she would start ranting off, and we could feel the stress that she was pushing out into the world. Again, it was a direct reflection of Catherine, so we decided to slow that down as well. Sometimes when me and Catherine argue and bicker, the children will start crying. So I think it just serves to illustrate, again, our children are a direct reflection of us, and if we want our children to change their behavior or act in a different way, then it's up to us to look in the mirror and change our behavior and act in a different way. It presents us with a wonderful opportunity to change the people that we are. Another thing that's a cycle that I'm breaking, and something I want to touch on here for a little while, is the topic of spanking, which of course will naturally come up in any discussion on peaceful parenting. On the surface, for libertarians or those that want to create a free society, I hope that people would see how inconsistent it is to believe that the government ought not use force or coercion, which is the fear of the use of force, the fear of violence, in order to encourage people to change behavior. That's what happens when you pay your taxes. People do it because they're afraid of the consequences that would happen. It's what happens when a police officer comes up and tries to compel obedience. It's because they have a firearm on their side, and people in their mind think about the possibility of harm or violence being inflicted upon them, so they have a tendency to change their behavior. I think as libertarians, if we reject that idea, we ought to reject that idea with our parents, with our parenting and the relationship that we have with our children. And I threw this out to the world a year ago or so on Facebook, expecting most libertarians to say, oh yeah, we're right on board with you, but I was surprised to see, maybe I wasn't too surprised, that it sparked a big controversy. 650 comments later, there was person after person after person after person trying to justify their use of violence on their children. And I do believe spanking is using violence on your children. Most definitions will show that violence has a couple different elements that are usually found in the definition. That's the use of force and the product, the desired end is for someone to feel harm or to be hurt, generally whenever you think of violence. And I think spanking fits that bill pretty well. So again, if we are trying to create a world where we want people to reject the idea of using coercion to change behavior, then we ought to start by rejecting the use of coercion to change behavior within our households. Another thing that I see wrong with spanking and other forms of discipline, which is a word I don't appreciate either, whether it's timeouts or rewards and punishment, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, is that it fails to point out the intrinsic problem with the child's behavior. It's like it's skipping the real issue. It's failing to strike at the root. It's failing to do what I like to call curiosity and communication. We always need to remember to ask why. Why is our child acting out? Why are they being frustrated? Why are they throwing a fit? Rather than just saying, oh, they're throwing a fit and I don't appreciate the way they're acting, so I'm going to use coercion, fear, rewards and punishment, or timeout in order to change their behavior. It's important to step back and take a look at why they might be acting that way. And a perfect example of that is with our daughter, Aliana. It's actually coming back a little bit now, but we were doing good with it for a while. Every once in a while, she hits Mama. She was biting at a younger age, too, which I think a lot of children go through. But we found her hitting Mama. And so, man, that was really difficult to deal with because obviously we're not going to hit her back. That's another thing. Parents, be sure you don't hit your child to teach them that hitting's wrong because they're smarter than most people think, and they'll certainly pick up on that and believe that it's disingenuous, and it'll probably put some hampers in the relationship that y'all are building. So Aliana would hit Mama, and instead of reacting and getting angry or trying to discipline her or punish her or put her in timeout or whatever, we decided to ask why. And we started to pick up on a pattern that Aliana would hit Mama when Dada was on his smartphone or when he was working and when he wasn't giving her the attention that she desired at the time. So we found that once we put the smartphone away and whenever I started committing more of my time and energy, giving it 100% rather than 75% in family mode, 25% dinking around on my phone, responding to emails, we saw that the hitting and the biting reduced dramatically, almost down to zero. Although she's been a little bit rough lately. I think it's because that I've been too busy, we've been too busy, and we're not able to give her exactly what it is that she needs at this particular time. So that's why I think it's important, again, to ask why, to take a step back, and not to say, what can I do in order to change this child's behavior so they'll fit the mold that I want them to fit, or so they'll act a certain way that's convenient for me, but to step back and say, why might it be that they're acting this way? When children throw quote-unquote fits, a lot of times it's because they're frustrated. And it's difficult for them to communicate exactly what it is that they're trying to get across. They need something, they can't communicate it. One thing that worked really well to help us communicate with our daughter is we did baby signs, which was absolutely phenomenal. And now she's doing like 8-sentence words. She's 20 months old. She communicates with us really well. We're really impressed and proud of how well she's doing with communication. I think in large part is because at a very early age, she was responding to us with signs, saying, change my diaper, I want more, I'm all done. And she was doing about 20 signs at a time. There's a lot of great resources and references online and websites, and there's books that you can get. And it may be difficult at first because they're not really reacting, but when they start throwing the signs back at you, it's really important. So what that allows, not only does it help with their communication skills and helping them to speak more clearly and proficiently at a younger age, but it also helps them to communicate their needs. So it's less of a guessing game with the parent, and they'll be less frustrated when they're seeing that they're able to communicate to their parents and their needs are being fulfilled rather than having a period of frustration. Because most of the time when kids are upset or when they're throwing a quote-unquote fit, and I say quote-unquote fit because I learn a lot from Dana Martin, who does radical unschooling, and I asked her, what do you do when your children throw a fit? And she rejected the idea of even using the concept of throwing a fit because she thought it was belittling. She said, children don't throw fits, they just get frustrated, and they express frustration in certain ways. So whenever your children are expressing frustration, again, it's important to take a step back and ask why. Not say, what can I do in order to stop this fit, in order to make it easier, in order to appease the person at the table next to us, but ask, why is it that my child could be throwing this fit? Antonio found for me earlier a statistic that was actually pretty troubling, back on the topic of spanking, and that was that 90% of parents report spanking or using some sort of corporal punishment on their children when they're toddlers. That was from the University of New Hampshire, a project that they have. And I just find it really hard to believe. I can't imagine striking my child, a 20-month-old, a toddler. Some parents even hit their infants. I think at this particular age, the children are so young and so dependent on us in many ways that it's actually the responsibility of the parent to ensure that their child is in a safe environment. So of course people always hear, well, you know, I don't spank for certain reasons, but I do spank when my child runs out into the street. So I always hear. Or when my kid just continuously reaches up for the hot stove. You got to spank them to teach them that it's wrong to do that. Well, first of all, it misses as I said before, the intrinsic reason why you don't run in the street, or the intrinsic reason why you don't touch the stove, and it tries to side skirt that by using fear and force and coercion and pain in order to do that. And also on that subject, if a child doesn't learn why it is a bad idea to be out in the street, and of course it's difficult to teach a young child these things, then they may not learn, they may not realize the problems with it, and maybe when the parents aren't around, they'll do it anyway because their only motivator to not run the street was that fear of spanking and coercion. But at this particular point, at this age, I interviewed Stefan Molyneux, who's a big advocate of peaceful parenting, and I said, well, what do you say to those parents who say we spank whenever our child runs into the street? He said, well, there's this new invention that you may have heard of. It's called a fence. It's a wonderful tool to prevent your children from running in the street. Another thing is just be in between your child and the street. If your child has a tendency to run to the street, don't let them in the front yard alone. Or if they're going to be in the front yard, position your chair closer to the street than the area that they play in. And if they don't go by there, if they start to go motion towards the street, be sure to put them back or tell them that it's not a good idea. Some parents, and the same thing with the kitchen. If your kid's going to reach up to the stove, then get a freaking baby gate and don't let them in the kitchen anymore. I know sometimes these things are easier said than done. Another thing that parents often say, well, we got to spank or we got to use some sort of punishment or corporal punishment or rewards and punishment or timeout system is whenever a child is throwing a fit, quote unquote, at a restaurant, or whenever they're just screaming at the top of their lungs, or whenever they're just being a real pain in the neck and they're distracting other people. Well, I personally think, this came to mind from a comment that my dad had, because I posted on Facebook. I'll be giving this discussion here at PorcFest, and I'm about to share a personal story of how spanking affected me as an adult, being spanked as a child. And I posted, I intend to share this discussion and have people learn from it and talk about how spanking affected me as an adult. I get a call from my mom, a voicemail, Happy Mother's Day. You know, a friend of mine called and said, you said something on Facebook about us spanking. You know, don't portray us as abusive. I feel like you may think we're being a bad parent because we've only talked about this once, me and my father, and I think it's important for closure for people that feel that spanking harmed them as children to discuss this with their parents. But my dad posted on the Facebook comment, and he said, you know, you were actually, you know, a little bit less behaved than most children, and you were disciplined than less children. And then he says, and you have a son now, which I hear the sons are a little bit more unruly and rowdy. I'm yet to experience it. But he said, you have a son, you should wait till you pass judgment until he grows up a little bit more. And it got me thinking, like, there's nothing that my child could ever do that I would think, like, oh, snap, now I'm going to hit him, or now I'm going to use force, now I'm going to grab the belt. I can't think of anything that would cause me to do that. I've already made up my mind that I'm going to parent in this particular way. And it got me thinking how a lot of times I could see how parents, they use spanking or they use these tools like corporal punishment, times out, rewards, and punishments in order to mold the child to fit their needs, rather than seeing it as a partnership where we all need to mutually respect each other's needs. They say, well, I want to go out to eat with my wife, and if my kid's going to act up, then I'm going to take him into the bathroom or take him outside and use violence on them, because they need to know that whenever we go out to eat, you need to act or behave a certain way. Well, sometimes when we go out to eat, Aliana gets upset and is frustrated, and sometimes she screams. So we just walk outside with her. And if there's a child that's so unruly to the point where a parent would be inclined to hit them when they go out, they go, oh, we can never go out, we're so frustrated, we can't take these kids out, we want to go out. I mean, maybe you shouldn't go to dinner with your child. Maybe, unfortunately, you can't have the privilege of going out to eat dinner. You've made the choice. Most instances, parents make the choice to bring children into the world. That's a grave responsibility. You now have a duty. They didn't choose to be entered into this world. Or maybe they did, depending on your metaphysical thought. But I think it's an extra layer of responsibility. This is something that Molyneux touches on as well, that we ought to take that into consideration, that we brought the child into this situation, so now we may have to change our lives a little bit. We may not be able to go out to eat as often as we wanted to. But certainly just ceasing the activity that's difficult to you is certainly a better idea than using physical violence against a child. A lot of times I hear people say, oh, well, I was spanked and I turned out just fine. I spanked my kid and he gets straight A's. Well, first of all, I often ask, well, have you done any self-reflection and have you explored any possible negative results of the spanking in your adult life? Is there anything that you could point to that may have been a result of the spanking, or your parents using violence, or someone that you would expect to be a caregiver, a nurturer, someone that should comfort you whenever they start striking fear into your eyes? And they say, no, everything's fine. But on the surface, when they reveal that they now hit their children, I can tell you what the negative outcome is that they're hitting children and they think it's okay. On the surface, that's a negative outcome. But a lot of times, if you do some psychoanalysis or some self-reflection, you will find that there are some negative aspects. And I think it's important to share that with one another so we can maybe get some people to realize some things that happened as a result of spanking, so that maybe they can reconsider using that as a tool to try to change their children's behavior. And recently I did some self-reflection, and I learned of a negative effect that my spanking as a child had on my adult life. And this actually came with the help of Stefan Molyneux. We did a discourse with him, Catherine and I. Catherine and I were having some really big relationship problems, and it was based on a time when we were split up shortly, and I did something that maybe I shouldn't have done. But more importantly, I lied to Catherine about it, and I withheld the truth from her. She started having dreams about it, which is pretty wild, pretty cognitive of her. And I would always get defensive and say, why are you saying this? Why would you expect I would do something like this? And I lied to her for quite some time, and it caused a lot of difficulty in our relationship. And we had a conversation about it with Stefan Molyneux, and he starts asking about my upbringing as a child. And all of a sudden, Catherine tells him, well, he was spanked as a child. And I said, yeah, I was, and I'm open about that, but I don't see how it's relevant. So Molyneux starts asking some more questions in his typical Socratic method, and come to find out, I did some self-reflection and realized that perhaps when I was a child, namely I would get spanked as a child when I'd get in trouble at school, which was kind of a pain in the butt for being a libertarian, because I was in this public school indoctrination program that did not care for my needs as a child or my needs as a unique individual. I would act out. It wasn't challenging to me. It wasn't fun. Was more of a class clown, really. And so when I'd get in trouble in this public education coercion system, it would be taken out on me at home in the form of spanking. They were the rational, calculated spankings that I could expect. I learned to put batteries in my back pockets, actually, to lighten the blow of the belt, which actually is a good tip for you kids out there if your parents are spanking you. Essentially what was being taught to me and programmed in my mind, which shaped my being as an adult, was that I began to skirt personal responsibility. Let's say I did do some things that were disrespectful, wrong, I got in trouble at public school. Rather than coming home and saying, yeah, you know what, I did that, I was acting out, I was misbehaving, I would always say, no, it's the teacher's fault, she just has it out for me, or it was so-and-so's fault. I would skirt personal responsibility because I came to expect physical violence to be brought upon my person should I admit to it, or even when I didn't admit to it. And that shaped me as a human being. I believe it caused me to fear the acceptance of personal responsibility, which is one of the reasons why I lied to Catherine for so long about what I had done. Because I was afraid of accepting personal responsibility, because accepting personal responsibility was associated with physical violence being inflicted upon me. And when I realized that, it really was a game changer for me in my life, and really appreciate having that conversation with Catherine and with Stefan. And I think it's a valuable lesson for people who are spanking, who think that it didn't have any negative effects. Sometimes it's a little more difficult to see. You have to get a little bit beneath the surface in order to realize the negative effects. So I like to share that story. It's yet another reason why I think spanking is a bad idea. And for people that are trying to have discourse, I think we all ought to talk to our peers and people within our community and our family, and talk to them about spanking and let them know you may think that it's doing wonders now, which it doesn't even do wonders, because I continue to get in trouble in school. But there could be some negative consequences that you're imprinting in your child's mind. And many people are afraid to self-reflect. It's difficult. It's probably the most difficult thing to do, to take a look in the mirror and find fault within yourself and work to change that fault. But I think if we do that, we'll all be better off, and we can learn more about ourselves and about our children and the way that we raise our children. So I like to share that story as a demonstration of some of the negative effects that may not be so present or apparent for people that think that spanking is okay, and I turned out okay. And again, it's a continuous cycle. So many children that were spanked end up spanking their kids, and it just continues on. And I think it's time that we could move beyond that as a community to start with, as a liberty community, but as a society as a whole. We should reject that notion that it's okay to use force and it's okay to use coercion in order to change people's behaviors, because there's a lot of side effects that go on top. And I just want to hit again one more time, it fails to recognize the intrinsic problem or the intrinsic reason why a child is acting in a certain way. Had my parents had the foresight to say, oh, well, maybe he's acting up all the time in public school because public school isn't a good medium of education for him. Maybe we should consider Montessori school or homeschooling or some sort of alternative education. Stick around for a discussion from Antonio Beeler on that front directly after I talk. Again, asking why, being curious. Why is it that my child is behaving in a certain way? Is there anything that I can do in order to change my behavior or change the environment that he's in order to help with the situation? Just a quick talk on rewards and punishments. I read this great book by this guy named Alfie Kohn, Kohnalfie. It's called Unconditional Love. And it talks about some of the negative aspects of using timeout and using a rewards and punishment system. And for me, the biggest part of it is, again, it fails to strike the root of a problem as to why a child is acting in a certain way, and it just tries to cement and try to cover things up by using these tools. I think it's arbitrary as well, the timeout. It's a lot like incarceration, putting a child in another room to be alone, when in reality, maybe the reason they're acting up is because they need more of their parents' attention or they need more of A, B, or C. The rewards and punishment is a very similar concept. When you reward a child, these are less controversial, and I think that they would be preferable to using physical violence, but I still think they fail to strike the root and fail to look at the root cause of why children act a certain way in order to help fulfill their needs. It's all like a big, like your Sherlock Holmes with it. When they can't communicate, you got to figure out what it is about why they're acting the way that they are. And I think rewards and punishment creates confusion in the minds of the child. It fails to strike the root. And I think it really just helps one of the reasons why I think it happens so much is because children are trying to have the child molded to fit their needs rather than have a partnership reality and relationship. It seems like a simple solution. Obviously, hey, stop doing A, B, or C and you'll get a sucker, or stop doing A, B, or C and we'll get ice cream after this. It doesn't ask why. It fails to strike the root at what's really going on. I think that's real important. So some advice that I could give on some of the things that we do when a child is acting out and engaging in behavior that the parent finds objectionable. I'm pretty laissez-faire, and if the kid wants to scream or if the kid wants to run around and go crazy, I'm all about it, as long as they're not in an environment where they're going to hurt themselves. Those are pretty much the only two concepts, rules that we have. I don't really want to call them rules, but we want to live in a way that our children aren't able to hurt themselves. And I think there should be a certain level of respect for other people. So, for example, if we're at home and Aliana's screaming her head off, whatever. We tend to say, if you want to scream, if you want to be upset, come on, let's go be upset in your bedroom. And sometimes we even act it out. Or we'll go to our bedroom when we're genuinely upset. Let's go. We can be upset in our bedroom. It's our private space. We can do what we want in there. We can be upset. So we go into the bedroom and we scream and yell with them. And I think that's a good tool. So if you have people over, or if they're at a restaurant, for example, I normally just let the child scream. It's no big deal. But if you're at a restaurant and someone else is there trying to enjoy themselves, of course, you want to have a certain level of respect for the other restaurant goers. And that's when you could just, come on, let's go outside. Let's scream outside. I understand you're upset. I'd like to find out what you're upset about. Let's go talk about it outside. And so when a child is upset, rather than putting them in timeout or instituting a rewards and punishment system, or God forbid, spanking them or striking them in any way, I think it's important to get back to the root, to ask why, to get down on their level. Give them a hug. Let them know that you're here for them, that you love them, that you want to figure out what it is that's bothering them. Ask if there's anything that we need to talk about. Is there anything that we need to discuss? If the child is at an age where they can't yet communicate verbally, then just give them a hug. Spend some time with them. Probably 9 times out of 10, they just want mommy and daddy's attention. I think it's important to give it to them. Which brings me to one more point that I'm going to hit on, and then I'll wrap up and we can open up a conversation and discussion. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts, your ideas. We can all work on solutions and stuff together. That's if you're going to have children, and this is something that I need to look in the mirror, and I feel somewhat hypocritical saying this because I am such a busy person, but if you do make the decision, or you don't make the decision to have children, I think it's important that we begin to change our lives, and we slow down, and we shift the focus of our lives and our energy. And right now, I have too much of my focus in my work as the executive director of the Center for Natural Living. I do Rise Up Radio Show, the Liberty Beat. I'm just so busy. I've taken on multiple projects at the same time, and I think it's having a negative effect on my family life. So I think when we do have kids, we're taking on a massive responsibility, and there is going to be a time when they're able to go live on their own. But for the time being, especially when they're extremely young, it's important that we consider changing our lifestyle choices, changing what we do daily, so we're not so stressed out, so we're not thinking about work when we should be giving our kids 110% of our attention. And one thing that I can help bring that about, which is very difficult, and me and Kat are trying to shift the way that we live. We're trying to shift the culture of community in our area. Back in the day, there used to be multiple generations living on the same property, so the grandparents could help with the children when the parents are out tending the fields or when they're out working. Then when the grandparents, 20 years down the road, the grandparents are getting a little older, turning into infants of their own, wetting themselves and getting nice and droopy skinned. The children are now 5, 10, 15 years old, and they can take care of the grandparents, and everyone can live as a unit, as a community. Likewise, it doesn't have to be a family unit. It could be friends. Friends are family as well when there's love. I think if we work together to build more community, to shift the way that we live, not this way that we live where everything is sectioned off and where people are over here and some families don't even live in the same city, but if we can all come together and we can have multiple people that are part of the same community, part of the same family, living on the same property or living within the same general vicinity and helping one another, it'll certainly serve to alleviate the stress and difficulties that do come with having children and trying to live a somewhat normal life and continuing on some of your activities. And I think it may take time and it may be difficult for us, for this generation, but I think we can transition back to that, and we ought to transition back to that, and we ought to do everything in our power to build more community and to live in a way that will allow us to have the help that we need. I just want to thank Tracy Ward, and sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, and her 2 daughters, because they've really helped Catherine and I. They've really helped Catherine and I to benefit our lives and help raise our children. So thanks, Tracy. She's busy working back there. And thank you, Claire, and thank you, Madison. It's just an example of 2 families coming together and helping one another and benefiting one another in a way that the families wouldn't be able to do if they were just alone, if it was just one family. So I think that's ultimately the path that can help make everything that I've talked about, which is really difficult. Raising children is the most difficult thing that I've ever done in my life by far. But I think when we can come together as a community and unite families, it'll make it a lot easier to do just that. So to recap some of the themes that I discussed, parenting presents a wonderful opportunity for us to look in the mirror, reflect on the people that we are. Didn't think I'd be crying during a parenting discussion either 10 years ago. To reflect on the people that we are and to realize that our children are the products of us and our environments. And if there's anything about our children that we may not appreciate, don't take it out on them. Take a look in the mirror, ask why, and use community, let's add community. Use curiosity, communication, and community instead of coercion and condemnation. And I think it'll benefit us all as a whole, as a society, and it'll make sure that we're living a life that's more loving and more fulfilling for our families. So that's the core of my discussion today. Thank you. Antonio's going to hand out these flyers here. We're putting together a reality-based program called Sovereign Living. There's going to be 12 episodes, and it's going to follow Catherine, myself, Aliana, and William in our quest to lead a more self-sufficient, natural, and voluntary life. Some of the topics that will be discussed are alternative education and peaceful parenting, partnership parenting. We're going to be doing a screening on Thursday at 3 p.m. There'll be a tidbit of episode 3, which covers Catherine and I's second natural home birth. So I'm going to invite everybody out on Thursday at 3 p.m. to come check out the show that we're doing. It covers essentially our life and the stuff that we're doing and much of the stuff that I talked about, and it puts it in a fun, entertaining, educational, and hopefully inspirational manner so people can watch and see that while it is difficult, we can change the way that we live, and we can better ourselves, our families, and in turn create a more peaceful, voluntary world. So I don't know if these microphones are on, but we can open up the floor for discussion if anybody has any questions, comments, or any advice that they want to share with the crowd, or any problems that they're experiencing within their families or anything like that that they want to talk about. Anybody?
Hi.
How are you?
Yeah, my name is Juan. There's a few people that in Toronto, we have a small community. Oh, sorry. We have a small community, and we there's this peaceful. See what it was called, Global Peaceful March going on in about September. There's a Facebook meetup sort of thing going on. And we want to go to this thing and try to spread peaceful parenting ideas, right? So we're probably going to get pamphlets going on and try to talk to people, which is really exciting and nerve-wracking. And I was wondering what you think, what your approach would be. I don't know if you talked about this already, so I'm sorry if I'm like making you repeat yourself because I got here a bit late. But what would be your approach in sort of trying to sell this idea to people that are, should be interested in peace, right? Mm-hmm. And might be a pretty safe environment to explore this thing, because how are they going to sort of be like, no, spanking is correct, right? In that kind of environment. So I'm curious what you think about that and how to approach that challenge.
So it's a peace rally, global peace, like anti-war, or just peace in general?
Let me try to read you the name. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to be discussing, but it should be, it's more a political kind of like no war type thing. That's what I'm thinking it is.
Well, if their goal is peace in the world and peace in society, I would try to demonstrate the inconsistency and the hypocrisy of not leading a peaceful household. One of the things that I like to do in my activism in all different forms, whether I'm convincing someone that we ought to be peaceful parents or whether I'm convincing someone that we ought to reject the use of government for anything and trying to turn people onto anarchism, is to create cognitive dissonance in their minds so they kind of have a short circuit, and just to get them to point out the inconsistency in advocating for a peaceful world while simultaneously living a violent life and not having a peaceful household. So I'd start with that overall concept maybe, and then have it say like, if we want to create a peaceful world, what better place to start than in our own households? Point out the inconsistency and the hypocrisy of advocating for peace while simultaneously living an unpeaceful life. And then maybe touch on a couple subjects. I like to do things in threes. Hit up a couple points about spanking and why you and your crew maybe find the strongest, hardest hitting, pun intended, points on why spanking is bad. I would start with the negative consequences. It fails to create, it fails to strike the root of the problem. It just uses arbitrary authority. You could also point to rejecting the use of coercion to change people's behavior in society. Shouldn't use that for our children. And just have a conversation. Most importantly, humble yourselves. Don't come at it like what you're doing is wrong. You should be ashamed of yourself. We're doing the right things. What we're doing is right, because people instantly put up a defense mechanism. Let people save face. Talk about it. Maybe if you were spanked, or if you've had experience with spanking, say, I've felt the urge to do something like that in my life, but I've stopped. I think those are all things that'll help a whole lot. A quick side story on that note, I put up an ad on this radio station that we broadcast the Liberty Beat on in Austin for SovereignLiving.tv. It was part of the Liberty Beat. And it said Sovereign Living. The Liberty Beat is sponsored by SovereignLiving.tv, exploring agorism, peaceful communities, nonviolent parenting. And somebody called and complained and said, nonviolent parenting? What are they trying to imply? That I'm violent because I spank? So I would avoid anything that might arise some sort of defense mechanism in your language and the stuff that you do. Come to them humbly, come to them as an equal, saying, hey, we're exploring these ideas. We think it has immense benefits to create a more peaceful world. What are your thoughts on these ideas? Have you ever considered A, B, or C? Just come to them in don't have statements that are bold and spanking is bad, here's why, but have statements that invoke curiosity and that don't arouse defense mechanisms. And then you'll be able to have a conversation on a more objective playing field rather than them thinking that you're attacking their parenting, because a lot of people do not appreciate it one bit when they think that you're telling them how to raise their kids. Which can be intrusive, and nobody wants to come in and say, you need to do this, you need to change that. I think it's important to ask questions, and if you're trying to force your viewpoint upon someone, they're not going to, that also fails to strike the root. But using the Socratic method and getting them to realize the negative implications of some of their actions themselves will really genuinely create an environment where they can fulfill that ideal rather than you forcing it upon them. Let it become their idea rather than an idea that you impressed upon them. Yes?
I just attended a wedding, and I know this couple's intending to have children soon. I'm sorry. I just attended a wedding, and I know this couple is planning on having children soon. What are your favorite resources to give to new people to this idea?
Friends, family. There's always books to read. I'll point out some books that I've come across, but I think nothing beats family and community coming together and talking and helping one another. I would just ask them to always remain curious. Just like quick points, be curious. Don't try to force your views upon your child. Learn from your child. I've learned so much more from my child, probably more than they've learned from me about myself and about the world. There's a great book, Alfie Kohn, Unconditional Love, or Unconditional Parenting, I think it might be. There's a wonderful resource. Her name's Dana Martin. She does radical unschooling, and she wrote a book about radical unschooling. Some people find it to be extreme. I think it's pretty spot on in most aspects. But yeah, I would say rather than pointing out books and resources to give them, I would just go talk to them or find other parents to go talk to them and let them know, you're about to embark on the most difficult journey of your life. It's also the most rewarding and fulfilling, but it's difficult. And do you have children? Find some other parents that you look up to and that you think model the behavior that parents ought to model, and try to hook them up. Go out for coffee, have discussion, just try to create an environment. The best thing you could do is always be there for them. Go hang out with them. If they seem like they're getting a little overwhelmed, come over and say, maybe I could look after the kids for a while. Just be a resource to help them out. I think on a human-to-human level is what I would advise. Anybody else have anything?
So it's clear that you don't want to use violence on your children, and you want to protect them from that. But there are other people in society who will subject your child to violence, such as peers, teachers, members of their church, perhaps, coaches. So how do you live a life of peaceful parenting when you have other people out there who are exhibiting the wrong actions or violent actions towards your child?
Sure. That brings up a good question with the interaction with your child, too, because sometimes Aliana would hit me, and I thought, maybe I'll use a Gandhi method here. I'm just going to let her hit me. And she really popped me pretty good, actually, and I don't think it changed her mind. Sometimes people, when a child hits them, I know this is kind of a side note on what your question is, they try to overreact and say, oh my God, you hurt me, start crying. I think that's disingenuous, and it causes fear in the child's mind. I tried that as a strategy once. Maybe when she hits me, I'll just really overreact and make it seem like it was a terrible thing for her to do that. But looking back, I think that's probably not the most genuine thing to do. Creates unnecessary fear in their minds. They begin to feel genuinely bad, like they hurt you on a certain level. That being said, if a child, obviously an infant or a toddler isn't genuinely going to hurt you, and you have the ability to separate yourself from them if they are trying to come at you and attack you. If an older kid is genuinely coming at a parent and hurting them and trying to fight them, which sometimes happens, it's my belief that if you raise the child in a way where you're genuinely curious and you have that communication going the whole way, there won't be the resentment or the outburst to where it could get to a point like that. But I think it's still virtuous and the thing to do to prevent your child from hitting you by pushing them away and physically preventing them from harming you. I don't think a retribution or reacting by hitting them back would be a good idea, but certainly prevent them from using force upon you by using force in a manner to prevent harm on yourself is totally acceptable. When it comes to the rest of society, somebody posted this on the Facebook discussion that was going on for my post about this particular discussion. They said Tai Chi is a wonderful tool. Teach your children tools to defend themselves. Tai Chi is a martial art that's mainly defensive in nature. It takes your attacker's energy and shifts it away from you in a manner that you're not actually striking them, although if you need to save yourself, of course, striking is useful. That's where the kung fu aspect comes in. But I would teach children that it's okay to defend yourself. It's okay to use force and violence in order to do so. And if it's a major concern, then I would recommend helping the children out by providing tools or resources, teaching a son how to defend himself, a daughter how to defend themselves, enroll them in Tai Chi. Our roommate, thankfully, is a Tai Chi instructor, which is why I'm pointing to that one. And then also do what you can, and of course this is impossible to do in every situation, but don't allow them to be around negative actors that would inflict harm upon them. If they're at an age where they are vulnerable to attack and incapable of defending themselves, then I would do what you can to prevent them from being put in a situation like that. Biggest thing you could do is don't put them in public school where they're around anybody, any willy-nilly child whose maybe parents beat the hell out of them and they're inclined to beat the hell out of other children. I believe that's where most bullies come from. But just do your best to keep them out of an environment where that takes place. And if that is a possibility, I think it's certainly a good idea to teach children to defend themselves. And I think if you are to use a medium of defense, Tai Chi is a wonderful type of martial art. So is Aikido, karate, which is all about taking the attacker's energy, reflecting it in a way. It's kind of a martial arts that's consistent with NAP, in my opinion. Anybody? Yes. All right.
Yeah. What's your best advice to give to someone who might be new to the principles of non-aggression, and they've risen a child in that environment, who was also raised up in that environment, who's seeking to explore the non-aggression way to raise their child? What's your best advice to give to them to approach that method? Because there will be probably a period of transition where there will be new behaviors and the child rebelling even more, or even you kind of get what I mean, right?
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot about deprogramming in a sense, which is why I'm really excited about the opportunity to raise children 100% from the get-go without ever thinking that the idea to use force is a good idea. Make sure they understand the value in what it is that they're doing. It may be difficult, and there may be a transition phase, which is hard on the parent and the child, but in the long run, it's going to benefit everyone immensely. And I think a lot of children rebel as teenagers, myself included, because their parents were rough on them or created harm in their lives when they were children growing up. So there's that period. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 15. But it's important to know the value in what it is, even though it may be difficult to go through that. I would encourage them to relax, really, just to take a step back, to slow down, to understand that things may be difficult. But if there isn't a genuine harm that's coming out as a result of it, if there isn't a threat to their safety as a child, then just go with it, laissez-faire. And it's going to be difficult. And again, that's where community and family comes into play to help one another to get through those difficult times. So I guess my advice would be to encourage them to realize the benefit of doing what it is that they're doing, to have them understand the reasons why so they feel fully committed in that choice. And then when it comes to the transition phase and transition period, to just understand that it is going to be difficult, to be laissez-faire with it, to understand that what they're doing is worthwhile, and while it may be difficult, as long as the kid isn't harming themselves or harming the parents or harming their peers or their surroundings, then just just roll with it. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Oh, cutting out.
Test, there we are.
NSA censoring it.
Yeah, just responding to what you just said there, very much my understanding of nonviolent communication is starting with yourself.
Yeah.
To be nonviolent and forgiving of your, faults, things that you want to change from before, and start from now moving ahead and a new course of action you've decided for yourself, and encouraging that also with your children. Oh, this happened? Yeah, okay. Now what do we do from here?
Yeah,
right?
For sure. Yeah, I agree. It's all about self-reflection. There's sweet Aliana and Bill right there, and Kat. Hey, Ollie. Does anybody have any other questions, comments, remarks, advice, rebuttals, peace and freedom, prosperity, happiness, joy, love?
All that sounds good. No,
I'll take it all.
I just would say, like you were saying earlier, there's a lot of things you said that are really good, but libertarians breed. I like that because seriously, I mean, but go into it with open eyes. That, like you said, I'd rather you not breed if you're not going to be responsible for it. But if you are, it really is rewarding. I've got twin 4-year-olds, and we can talk sometime. Girls, so 2 girls, but
Cool.
It really does teach you a lot. And I guess just a couple of things I would say, just not really adding anything to you've said a lot of great stuff, but to love them, I think that's one of the biggest things I try to always make sure they know is that they're loved, and trying to give them as much responsibility as you reasonably can as age progresses. And obviously people could split finer hairs on what is, the level that they can do. But I mean, kids are a lot more resilient and a lot more able to do more than we probably give them credit for in process, and trying to kind of find that niche as they're going really helps.
Yeah. It's all about
at
balance.
least I feel like that. And, I've gotten them to 4, so.
Nice.
Anyway,
For sure.
but no, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's all about balance with all sorts of different aspects, with responsibility and safety, and how much you hold them close and don't let them out in the world at particular ages, and how much you do give them the responsibility and the ability to do wrong and learn. The experience is the greatest teacher. And, if there's something that the child will do that maybe it'll hurt a tiny bit, sometimes it's okay for them to experience that because they'll learn it. It's certainly more preferable for them to learn the intrinsic reason why you ought not to do something rather than try to have some arbitrary reason put upon them through rewards, punishment, times out. Hey, Ollie. This is Ollie. We'll see how easy it is to do a speech with She's totally going to be no stage fright whatsoever. She's been brought up in front of crowds for quite some time. What is that? What is it? You ate it all? You're sticky. Another thing that's a good bit of advice that I got from Dana Martin that I meant to include earlier is the idea that don't expect the children to act a different way. Don't expect the children to act above their age. Sometimes we say, oh, you're a big girl if you do A, B, or C. Well, I think the children are at the age that they're at, and we can't expect them not to do something. Another thing is when children get upset or throw fits when they're hungry, don't be upset. I get upset and pretty aggravated and grouchy. You can ask Kat whenever I'm hungry. And I understand that, and I'm able to communicate that. Imagine a child that may not be able to express themselves or express what they're experiencing at that particular time when they're hungry. So I think it's important not to expect too much out of our children to the point where it causes stress in our lives, because they'll be able to pick up on that as well, just to go with the flow. Another bit of advice that I got, I think Kat got this one from somewhere. It's don't live your life or have a house or an environment, because their house is like their castle. It's their comfortable area. Don't have your house be like a museum where, don't touch that. Don't pick that up. That'll break. If there's something that's so valuable to you that your child could break, then put it out of their reach. Again, when our children are especially young, we have the ability to control so many things, whether it's them running into the street, them touching the stove, or them breaking the vase that you have on your mantle. Just move it out of their reach. It's so important for children to be able to experience things and touch things and feel things and explore things and get into things and knock stuff over and experience that type of stuff. I think it's just all about not being stressed out and just relaxing. And the difficulty that I'm having, to go back to the self-reflection, is I have such a workload on my shoulders right now that I often find myself thinking about it when I ought to be giving 100% of my attention to my children. So I'm resolving to reduce my workload. I wake up every day at 6 a.m. to prep for my radio show, so I'm trying to stop my workday at 3 p.m. 3 p.m. rolls around, I'm done with work. No more. Your email, I'll respond to it tomorrow. It can wait. It's not as important as having a happy, fulfilled life, and that's something that I'm struggling with because I'm such a workaholic, but I certainly value my family's happiness more than I do my job or what it is that I do in life. So that's something that I'm personally working on, and I think it'll immensely help and benefit with my stress level, but also the children picking up on that, for me to just let go and to devote 110% whenever it's time to relax and hang out. There's a couple more resources. Anybody familiar with The Voluntarist, the magazine that was printed out? I think it ended in the 90s. They have a bunch of articles about homeschooling and parenting that are really worthwhile checking out. There's a resource, it's called Homeschooling, A Hope for America. And and it's a book that's a collection of short essays that were put out in the Voluntarius by Carl Watner. So I definitely recommend that. I learned a whole lot from that. And then there's another book, I can't recall the title right now, but it goes over a bunch of different things in that same vein of peaceful parenting, alternative education, and letting go and living stress-free. Does anybody have any other questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, sir.
As you and your wife had this transition into peaceful parenting, you must have had disagreements, and if you did, how did you overcome those?
Well, that's a good question. Well, thankfully, we started off with peaceful parenting because we were libertarians before we had the children. It's actually the Department of Homeland Security brought us together, but we were both fighting fusion centers, her in Kansas City, me in Austin. So thank you, Janet Napolitano, and everybody that made that possible. I don't think we've had too many disagreements with our parenting approach. We both try our best to let our guard down and just have open communication, and not to be too strict in our positions. To understand that we are imperfect. We don't even have a 2-year-old yet. We don't exactly know what we're doing. We're doing it though. And to not be so hard on your position, just to have open, loving communication, to discuss the merits of something, to not get stuck in a position like, oh, well, that's my position, now I have ownership in this position, and I'm going to stand by this position no matter what, because for me to give up this position makes me feel like less of a person. Reject that entirely, do the opposite, let your guards down, and let it be about the needs of the children, not the needs of someone's ego or someone's position to stick in it. And just open communication, open discourse is what I would recommend. And again, that's a lot easier said than done. One thing that we don't do, but we could, is regular once a week, we're going to have a family meeting, Saturday from 2 to 4 p.m. where we can discuss things from the previous week that we had a problem with. Kat, we should do that. She's going to say, well, stop working and we'll have time to do that. That's what I would recommend. Just both partners putting their guard down and understanding that a discussion on any topic that they may disagree with will only serve to better their relationship with their child. I think that might help a lot. I guess maybe we got time for one more question? No? Anybody? Yes.
What's really great also, time for you and your wife.
Yes,
yourselves.
Indeed.
Date night.
Date night.
Date night. Yes, gotta have
Grandma.
it. Hey, because the closer you are as far as being on the same page, the kids pick up on that too.
Yeah, for sure.
And time
they definitely
to
do.
focus on that relationship. That's
Yeah.
the environment that holds all of it together.
Without a doubt, for
Yep.
sure. All right, thank you. I want to encourage everybody to go to the Sovereign Living screening on Thursday at 3 p.m. I think you'll really appreciate the work that we've done with this project. SovereignLiving.tv is the website. It's going to be a 12-episode reality-based program exploring a lot of the ideas that we talked about today. And you'll get to have an intimate look at the birth of our second child, a natural home birth. And definitely please come out Thursday at 3 p.m. For more information on the nonprofit that I'm the executive director of and co-founder of, it's called the Center for Natural Living. The mission is to demonstrate the value of voluntary cooperation and natural living in the areas of sustainability, family, and health by creating educational media and helping families to fulfill their basic needs. The website is centerfornaturalliving.org. So thank you, everybody, for taking part in the discussion. Appreciate it.
Excitement builds on election day. Results come pouring in. A landslide victory for the underdog. A proud and glorious win. And the people cheer between their tears and call their rising sun to spread his might and shed his light on darkness overcome. And the people cry from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. But the night grows long and our victory song has lost its melody.